What would it be like if you already accomplished your goal? No, seriously, what would it be like if you already achieved your manifestation? Where would you be? Who might you be with? How would it feel? How marvelous would it be? And what would that experience be like? That actually is step 2 in our series of 5, today being step 2 of 5 of how we can manifest our goals. We're actually going to take a different approach today because I've done a marvelous video on the imaginal event, which was well received, and I'm going to leave a link for that. It complements that video along with my series on how to manifest. This I'm going to spend a little extra time on, and that is step 2, because step 2 is using the imaginal event, an event that actually would occur and after an experience you would have if your goal was already realized, if you'd already have that new job, that new career, and are making that big income, if you've already achieved being with that SP you desire to be with. What would that experience be like? Today, we cover that with actual true stories and events. I'm in a beautiful park right now. So let's get started and let's manifest our best lives through the use of true stories on the imaginal event.
In Neville Goddard's marvelous book, Seed Time and Harvest, Chapter 2, which is entitled The Four Mighty Ones, Neville highlights the importance of the imaginal event. Notice he says here, in part, however, the first mighty one only suggests a theme. Keep in mind, you yourself are that mighty one and contain within yourself the ability to imagine and manifest your success. Now, you've already suggested a theme if you followed along in step 1, which is you know your goal and you know in detail the result that you would like to have. He says the dramatization of the theme is left to the originality of the second mighty one, which is also you, the author. So you play the part of the producer, the author, the director, and the actor. And today we're going to zoom in, hone in on the author, you, following this guidance to create your imaginal scene of already having your goal realized. He says, continuing here in the reading, in dramatizing the theme, author writes only the last scene of the play, but this scene he writes in detail. The scene must dramatize the wish fulfilled. He mentally constructs as lifelike a scene as possible of what he would experience had he realized his wish. You, my friends, are the author in your own life. What would you experience had you already realized your wish or goal? As I had suggested in step 1, after you have your goal, write it down. Write it out in detail in a notebook as what it would look like and feel like and be if you already had your goal fulfilled. So if you already had now your desired outcome, I want you to take a moment, either now, pausing the video, or at the end of this video. Don't delay. Do it right away. I want you to test it, because only in testing the practicality of it can you experience it. I know that this works, and I want to hear your experiences after applying it. So I need you to develop a brief scene that implies that you already have your goal. Now, I'm going to give you some practical examples from Neville's book, which is The Law and the Promise. And in that book, he gives 37 examples, but I'm only going to give you just a few to highlight what individuals did in real life From example number 15, there was a lady who used the imaginal event. In imagination, she used as many of her senses as possible in imagining that it was already true. As Neville says here, to build such a dream of fancy in her imagination, FG, that's the lady, brought to play all of her senses. Notice, sight, sound, touch, smell, even taste. And I'm inviting you to do the same thing when you imagine that end scene of already being with that person you desire to be with, for example, already having that career and that greater income, already experiencing less pain or no pain and having that health that you desire. Whatever your goal is, imagine what it would be like following the accomplishment and receiving of your desire. As a coach, I often get the question, can we use the power of manifestation for others that we care about? And the answer is yes. This is in part the story of a man who was suffering from a terrible disorder that he had operations on, but with little hope of recovery. Notice what Neville says. That is, the results she had. Notice, it has released my brother from the hospital, from pain and probable death, for he was facing a fourth major operation with little hope of recovery. I was very concerned and attempting to use what I had learned about my imagination. So she put into practice what Neville taught. She said, I first asked myself what my brother truly desired. Remember, he was close to death at that point. Does he want to continue in this body, or does he desire to be free of it? The question resolved itself over and over in my mind, and suddenly I felt he would like to continue remodeling his kitchen, which he had been contemplating before his confinement in the hospital. I knew my question had been answered, so notice, I began to imagine from that point. And so she, in her imagination, felt very strongly that he did want to recover his health. And so from that standpoint is where she began to imagine a scene that would imply he was already healthy. Continuing, she says that, attempting to see my brother in the busy activity of remodeling, I suddenly found myself gripping the back of a kitchen chair I had used many times when something happened. Then, suddenly, I found myself standing beside my brother's bed in the hospital. So again, this was all happening in her imagination. This was the last place I would have wanted to be, physically or mentally. But there I was, and my brother's hand reached up and clasped my hand tightly as I heard him say, I knew you would come, Joe. It was a whale hand I clasped, strong and sure, and the joy that filled and spilled over in my voice as I heard myself say, it's all better now. In this example, you notice how brief it was. She simply was imagining herself in the hospital holding his hand and him grasping her hand also firmly, and him saying, I knew you would come, Joe. And then she felt a strength and a sureness and a joy, and it filled her, and it spilled over into her voice, and she actually heard herself respond to his comment that, yes, she was there. It's all better now. Again, she said to him, it's all better now. You know it. My brother didn't answer, but I distinctly heard a voice say to me, remember this moment. I seemed to awaken then, back in my own home. This took place the night after he had entered the hospital. The following day, his wife telephoned me saying, it's unbelievable. The doctor can't account for it, Joe, but no operation is necessary. He's so improved that they have agreed to release him tomorrow. The following Monday, my brother went back to work and has been perfectly well since that day. Now, this is an amazing example of using an imaginal event and believing it true. Now, this next example is completely different. It's about someone who needed to sell their home. And if you look at the backstory, it was under very difficult economic circumstances where it was difficult to sell their home, and they had tried pretty much everything. So now they turn to their imagination. Notice what Neville suggested to them. Neville says, I suggested to my friends that they build an imaginal structure, that's the imaginal event, as this woman had done in the previous example. He says, and they were to sleep. She says, and that was, Neville says, to sleep, imagining they were physically present in their new home. So they wanted to sell one home and be in a new home. So they needed to imagine that they were already sleeping in that new home. That was the end scene. That was the imaginal event that would follow them selling their home. Again, more detail here. Imagining they were physically present in their new home, again sleeping, feeling they had sold their old home. I explained to them the wide difference between thinking of the image of their new house and thinking from the image of their new house. Thinking of it is a confession they are not in it. Thinking from it is proof that they are in it. That's exactly what she did. Now, as I noted here, it's not like watching a movie. You are the actor in the movie. So as a reminder, you are in that imaginal event. You have entered it. As Neville states here, entering into the image would give substance or reality to the image. Their physical occupancy of the new house, notice, would follow automatically. Allow that to sink in. Now, in her imagination, she viewed the world from the country house, rather from the city apartment. She smelled the fresh country air. She made this so real that she actually drifted off to sleep, feeling that she was in the country. That was on a Thursday night. At 9 o'clock the following Saturday morning, she phoned me and from her country home and told me that on Friday, a highly desirable tenant who met all of her requirements not only rented her apartment, but rented it on one condition, that he could move in that day. That's an amazing story, and it's a true documented story of how someone used their imaginal event. Now, you can do the same thing. The next example is also about a serious blood clot condition. So it's another health example, although there are many in the book that are not about health. This is also very fascinating. They say that 2 years ago, I was taken to the hospital with a serious blood clot condition, which apparently had affected the entire vascular system, causing hardening of the arteries and arthritis. A nerve in my head was damaged and my thyroid enlarged. Doctors could not agree on the cause of the condition, and all their treatments were completely ineffective. So she'd gone through all the typical processes with her doctor, and of course, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I would recommend that certainly you work with doctors, but she did that. In her case, it was to no avail. So here's what she says. I was forced to give up my very enjoyable activity and remain in bed most of the time. My body, from hips to toes, felt as though it was encased and bound by tight wires, and I couldn't put my feet on the floor without wearing heavy hip-length elastic stockings. So she tried everything to relieve the pain. She adds, I knew something of your teaching and tried very hard to apply what I had heard, but as my condition grew worse, I could no longer attend any of your lectures, and my despondency grew deeper. But notice now how visuals can help. They helped her, and they can help you. Notice she says, one day a friend sent me a postcard picture, the scene of a lovely beach by the ocean. It was a nice visual that helped her to use her imagination, because notice the picture was so beautiful. I looked and looked at it and began to remember past summer days at the seashore with my parents. So she dove into her imagination and recalled the enjoyable moments that she had enjoying the beach and the ocean. She says, for a moment, the postcard picture seemed to become animated, and flooding memories of myself running free on the beach filled my mind. I felt the impact of my bare feet against the hard, wet sand. I felt the icy water running over my toes as I heard the crash of waves breaking on the shore. Sounds like she wasn't in the Bahamas, but the point is that she dove deeply into her imagination and imagined herself as that child, as that person that she once was, enjoying the beach. I invite you to read that complete story in the book, The Law and the Promise, where you will see the conclusion was that almost overnight, it was seemingly miraculous. She was freed, and all that pain left her, and she recovered and was the healthy person that she desired to be. But it was because she used this imaginal event to create that scene that implied that she was once again free and able to enjoy the things that she once did. This next story is about someone who wanted to go on a cruise, a dream cruise, to 7 different ports and beautiful places that she imagined. We're going to see that she actually used visuals in her case also to assist her in developing her imagination and her imaginal scene. Notice she says, since childhood I've dreamed of visiting faraway places in the West Indies, that's the Caribbean. Particularly fired my fancy, and I would revel in the feeling of actually being there. Dreams are wonderful and inexpensive, and as an adult, I continued to dream my dreams, for I had no money or time to make the dream come true. So again, notice her circumstances. She didn't have the money or circumstances to actually pay for and have that dream cruise-related trip that she wanted to in the warm Caribbean. Now, likewise, you might be in the situation where you have the circumstances that are limited. It's reality. You don't have the money. You don't feel that you have the potential. You have the dream. You have the desire. But the reality of being able to do it is not there. This is what manifestation is all about. It's accomplishing something, being, having, or doing something that appears to be difficult and even impossible to achieve. And so the point is that you can achieve your dream if you use your imagination. And you're going to see here that using visual aids can be helpful. So keep that in mind as you create yours. Last year, I was taken to the hospital in need of surgery. I'd heard of your teaching, and while recuperating, had decided to intensify my favorite daydream while I had time on my hands. I actually wrote to the Alcoa steamship line asking for free travel folders and pored over them hour after hour, choosing the ship and the stateroom and the 7 ports I desired most to see. Here's her imaginal scene. I would close my eyes and in my imagination I would walk up the gangplank of that ship. That's the stairs leading up to that ship to board. So she would walk up the gangplank of that ship, and she said, "Feel the movement of the water as the great liner pushed its way into the free ocean. I heard the thud of the waves breaking against the sides of the ship, felt the steaming warmth of the tropical sun on my face, and smelled and tasted salt in the air as we all sailed through the blue waters." Now, I would actually encourage you to go back and listen to that again about how she closed her eyes. And as it says, I closed my eyes, I would invite you to listen to it again and actually close your eyes as you listen to it and imagine yourself boarding that ship and having that vivid experience with all of your senses, actually feeling it yourself, the movement of the water and the liner, actually hearing the waves against the ship, and actually feeling the warmth, the steamy warmth of the tropical sun on your face, and smelling and tasting the salt air as you sailed through the blue waters. She was there. She was feeling and thinking from her wish fulfilled, from this imaginal scene. I invite you to go back and listen to it again with your eyes closed and see if you can imagine some of those same senses and feelings. I hope that if you haven't, you will go back and listen to that with your eyes closed and practice using your senses. It's through practice that we learn to use our imagination. Notice what she did. For 1 solid week, confined to a hospital bed. Now, this could be just in your home, at your house, on your own bed at home. But here she says, I lived the free and happy experience of actually being on that ship. Then, the day before my release from the hospital, I tucked the colored folders, again, that visual that helped her. She tucked them away, and at that point, she forgot them. 2 months later, that's how long it took. 2 months later, I received a telegram from an advertising agency telling me I had won a contest. I remembered having deposited a contest coupon some months before in a neighborhood supermarket, but had completely forgotten the act. I had won first prize, and, wonder of wonders, it entitled me to a Caribbean cruise sponsored by the Alcoa Steamship Line. But the wonder didn't stop there. The very stateroom I had imaginatively lived in and moved about in while confined to a hospital bed had been assigned to me. It's absolutely amazing, but notice the rest. And to make it an unbelievable story even more unbelievable, I sailed on the one ship I had chosen, which stopped in not one, but all 7 ports I desired to visit. Isn't that absolutely amazing? I hope this inspires you because these, again, are actual true stories. I've had such experiences in my own life, which I've detailed about how I've manifested my beach island life. Now, I'm in the United States visiting my family, but in a few short weeks, I will be back in the Philippines, living on the beach where I was for the last 14 months before my visit back to my family. So I can absolutely, with that example and others in my life, tell you that this stuff works. It actually works. So stay to the end because I have more for you. I know many of you have been hoping and waiting for this one. This is about manifesting a partner. This lady actually manifested marriage. Now, I want you to go read the whole story in the book, but notice what she did to manifest her partner and actually marriage that she had imagined with him. She says, before going to sleep that night, I felt I was in a different bed in my own home as a married woman, not as a single working girl sharing an apartment with 3 other girls. I twisted an imaginary wedding band on my imaginary left hand, saying over and over to myself, "This is wonderful. I really am Mrs. J.E." Notice? And I fell asleep in what was, a moment before, a waking dream. So I have more for you on this point in an upcoming video on another step. But this was the important step. She brought that into her subconscious and connected that all with all that is necessary. It's deep, but all that needed to happen, she connected with by imagining it. So from within, without, is exactly what she did. She felt and imagined from her wish fulfilled. Now, I also want you to take note of how simple and brief, yet intense in the way that she used her imagination. She had been living with 3 other girls in an apartment while imagining being with that partner, with that guy. The very simple thing she did in her imagination was, she says, she twisted an imaginary wedding band on her imaginary left hand. She said over and over to herself as she fell asleep, visualizing and imagining this. Be sure and see my video on visualization also. But she imagined and felt herself saying from within herself, "This is wonderful. I really am Mrs. J.E. I really am." Now, they're using abbreviations here, J.E. However, of course, that's a real, actual name of the gentleman that she imagined herself with as she said, "This is wonderful. I really am Mrs. J.E." And then she fell asleep and took that into her subconscious, connecting to all the powers that are from within, connected to everything else. And that's how it works. Notice the results? In November, he proposed. In January, we announced our engagement. And the following May, we were married. The loveliest part of it all, however, is that I am happier than I ever dreamed possible. And I know in my heart he is too. Neville then again clarifies what you and I need to do. He says it is possible to pass from thinking of, right, just thinking about your goal, just hoping and wishing, but it's possible to go from that state of only thinking of to thinking from it, to thinking from. But the crucial matter is thinking from. Example, experiencing the state. For that experience in your imagination means unification. So you unify, you fuse with it. Whereas in thinking of, there's always the subject over there and the object over here. You understand? Thinking individual and the thing thought of. Let me read that again. Whereas thinking of, there is always subject and object. The thinking individual, right? And the thing over there, or the thing thought of. Self-abandonment. That is a secret. Become 100% committed and let go of the limitation that you're in and abandon yourself to your wish fulfilled. Fully immerse yourself into it. That's the secret. He says we have to abandon ourselves to the state, to that belief and imaginal event as real. And notice, you need to take pleasure in it. You need to love it. And I've talked about that before. In our love for that state, in our love for the state that you imagine yourself being and having and doing, you need to love it, take pleasure in it. And in so doing, live the life of that state in imagination first. and no more to the present state of lack and limitation and not having that fulfillment. Imagination seizes upon the life of the state and gives itself to the expression of the life of that state. In other words, you realize it or it becomes real and actually happens in your life. Faith plus love is self-commission. We can't commit ourselves to what we do not love. And that's why I've said before, always choose a goal that you really, really desire to have. Imagining is such that I must confess that I do not know what limits, if any, there are to its ability to create reality. The stories that I've presented prove that it works, and understand there's some 33 additional stories in that book, The Law and the Promise. All these stories show us one thing, that an imaginal activity implying the wish fulfilled must start in the imagination, apart from the evidence of the senses of your current life, right? In that journey, it leads to the realization of the desire.
Regardless of the videos you watch, the books you read, the teachers you follow, nothing can be manifested unless you take action. And those actions are actually implementing what is suggested. I challenge you to actually utilize the imaginal event. You can see more on the complete process by watching my other videos. See my playlist on manifestation. I'll leave the link for that in the description. And I thank you for being here. Please leave a comment. Have a question? Leave me a question, because I am all about helping you, as I have, manifest your best life.